Hello, I am William Jamar Wright,
And I'm Hattie.
and this is our podcast, HattieJo. What are we doing? So we are now officially here in Arizona.
A different background. We don't have anything up yet, but you might recognize.
And a new couch.
Oh, love this couch. Nice comfy couch.
It's definitely pretty nice. So we have been here about a month now, right?
Yep.
A little under.
Haven't been moved in for a month, but we've definitely been in Arizona just about a month because we came on the 27th.
Yeah.
And today's the 27th.
So we are enjoying our time here. Might have to reconsider this sweatshirt during the podcast.
During Arizona summers.
Yeah, it is definitely hot here.
Yeah, I feel like we're having a role reversal. Normally, at least in North Carolina indoors, I would be wearing like full sweats because I'd be cold, and you'd be wearing like a shirt or whatever.
Yeah, well, I'm only doing this out of like solidarity for the podcast.
No, I understand that, but that's what I'm saying. I feel like it's a role reversal a little bit. That you're all bundled and I'm all sleeveless.
So we definitely, in this episode, there's obviously been a lot going on in the country. And I thought it'd be like an interesting like topic to kind of talk about like the emotions of like the times and like what kind of emotions are you feeling,
and just
and
going with our theme of emotions.
Yeah, because this is definitely an emotionally triggering time for America, on both sides. I would say, which is interesting because like you kind of think of it like
when you say on both sides, what are you?
Just kind of both sides of like the political parties. I feel like both sides are
like
kinda,
Republicans and Democrats.
Yeah, which it kind of like I kind of hate that I'm kind of like phrasing it that way because like I'm phrasing it as like emotionally charged on both sides makes it think, or it kind of makes me think that like it's kind of a battle between the two.
Interesting.
Raging.
That's not how that's funny it's interesting that that's how you interpret those words. Because when I interpret that, I'm like, oh yes, like a bipartisan issue. Finally, like both sides agree that there's like issues to be had. But I guess that's not what you were.
Yeah, I definitely don't think that. I definitely don't think conservatives think that they're, or I would say like the loud conservatives that I like am friends with or like listen to and see like information that they put out there. I would definitely wouldn't say that they think that this is a bipartisan issue. Just like I can speak specifically. Like,
I totally see what you're saying. I don't think the two parties agree.
Yeah, no.
Right?
Yeah.
Like they're not. It's not like everyone's in agreement. This is what needs to be done.
Yeah.
So
but everyone
I understand what you're saying.
Everyone is emotionally charged up.
Yes, everyone cares very deeply.
Yes, and I wonder like why like do you have any theories on why like everyone's kind of like emotionally charged up right now?
So I think we should clarify for any potential listeners or viewers what exactly we're talking about, because I do feel like there are a lot of things going on right now. I feel like there's pandemic, and should we open, should we not, should we require masks, should we not, is that an infringement on freedoms, is it not? But then I feel like there's also a lot of racial inequality acknowledgement going on right now. And I think there's a lot of people that are like, yes, we've been calling for this for hundreds of years. And other people are like, racism doesn't exist. Are you kidding me? And then there's a third group of people that's like, I don't want to acknowledge it, but I liked how things were, And so I think there's kind of two separate but related issues at play. So I'm sorry, I forgot what your question was.
Oh, my question was just kind of like, so I guess going along those lines, like, how does the, like, because we've kind of talked about the pandemic.
Yes.
So how does, like, the racially charged issues, how do those make you feel?
So that was the question?
I don't know, just I kind of going off what you said. Like,
Okay.
how does that kind of make you feel emotionally?
Heavy.
Heavy.
And I heavy, and I'll say in several ways, right? So I think it's heavy first and foremost because I empathize, and I have to put a disclaimer on that. I am not black. I never will be black. I have not lived the experiences that you and other people have lived, right? I can hear about them, I can imagine them, I can experience not racist stuff, but I can experience other injustices and understand how it feels to feel like there are injustices. Yeah, but I don't truly know what it's like. I can do my best to listen and I can do my best to imagine, but at the end of the day, I have to recognize that I don't know what it's like.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so I say it's heavy because I think, well, this situation makes me feel heavy, and one of the reasons is because my heart goes out to everyone experiencing these things. I think we all have this ideal of like, oh, things are fair and just, and I remember my parents telling me my whole life growing up, like, get over wanting fair and just, like, the world's not fair, get used to it, right? And that's true, but I still feel like it still bothers me that there's injustice, and it still bothers me that things aren't fair, right? And so to feel like there are people on the non-receiving end of fairness does not sit well with me at all. So, and it's not just, oh, this isn't fair. It's like, people are dying, right? That's. It's not like, oh, I lost this game because the refs weren't fair, or like the rules weren't fair. Like, oh, I didn't get this job because it wasn't fair. That's a huge problem, right? But that's still, in my mind, not as bad of a problem as people dying.
Yes.
So anyhow, it's heavy to imagine what people are going through, and it's also heavy to acknowledge these things are happening, and like you just feel bad. Like that's a heavy feeling. The next thing that's heavy is feeling like I need to educate myself. I don't think people of color need to be doing the educating, right? Like I think
there's definitely enough material out there.
There is enough freaking material. Like, take some initiative, go read a book, go talk to people, just talk to people, just listen, like, just open your eyes, like, and it's heavy because I think there's a lot of things as a white person in this society that you don't even realize that you might be complicit in some ways, right? Because I do remember learning about slavery in elementary school and stuff, and middle school, high school, and being like, this is horrible, this is awful, right? And feeling like guilty about it, but also feeling like, well, I didn't do those things.
Yeah.
Right? Like, but as a child, you may not fully comprehend that it's like, but I'm benefiting from those things. Like, even though in your face way they don't exist, like there's a lot of racism that still exists, but it's not like slavery currently exists in my lifetime in the country that I live in. So no, I'm not complicit in slavery, but because it happened, like, I'm still benefiting from it. And realizing that is heavy, and also realizing there are other things in society that I may be participating in or have done or haven't done or whatever that are contributing to maintaining the status quo.
Yeah.
Right? So basically what's heavy is taking a good hard look at yourself and being like, implicit bias is real. Here are some ways that I have it, you know, or here are things I may have done or said in the past and why that's not okay. And so I think all of that is just heavy. But I wanted to put it out there that it's not only like an external thing that's heavy, but like an internal self-examination,
Yeah.
and learning and growth process.
Yeah.
So what would you say?
So it's funny, like I've obviously like I listen to a lot of like different podcasts and like commentators, and since there's not really much else going on in the world right now, everyone is like kind of commenting and giving their opinions on this, and it's really kind of like it's a sad state of affairs, but like I feel like this time in America, like it doesn't seem like to me like the behavior and like the killing of George Floyd, the killing of like Breonna Taylor, like these situations, like in a lot of ways they have like been normalized, and like I'm like, well, this is just another day in being a black person
in America.
Yeah, being a black person in America, and so that normalized.
And let's can we just pause for a moment? This is just a normal day being a black person in America. What the F? Anyway.
Yeah.
Continue.
Well, it's funny, and like pausing and like thinking about that, and like and I've heard some people say like, can like people like white people in particular, and I've honestly had to do this a little bit in like looking at like the ways in which I grew up, and like I perpetuated like sexism, and like thinking about like males being like dominant over females and like subjecting them to like whatever. Like I've had to kind of examine that in my like own behavior, and kind of like I've had to be uncomfortable with that, and I had to kind of sit in it, and that's something I've heard Bomani Jones talk about. It's just like, can white people like acknowledge it and just kind of sit in it and kind of be uncomfortable with it?
I feel like, sorry to cut you off again, but I feel like that's very much contributing to like the heaviness, right? I don't intend to do anything racist, but like coming to the realization of not only did people in the past benefit from this, but like I am still actively benefiting from like slavery, basically. Like that is heavy, and realizing that like some of the things I say, some of the things I do may have just like you're saying, like demonstrated sexist behavior or whatever, like demonstrated bigoted behavior, racist behavior, you know, and like definitely that's not comfortable. You know, and but I think a lot of people are like, oh, I grew up poor, so I don't have white privilege. And it's like, no, like white privilege has nothing, well, I won't say it has nothing to do with monetary, but you can be dirt poor, and still have white privilege, right? And like still have much better access to help, you know,
the way people view
you, the way you're treated.
If you're walking down the street, is somebody just gonna randomly call the cops on you and be like, there's a random person walking down my street, like, would you please send the cops over to like see what they're doing?
Right.
Like this,
or like before a lot of the anti-discrimination laws, like a white person, dirt poor 100 years ago, could go get a loan and just get it, and it'd be easy and fine.
Yeah.
Whereas a black person, equal dirt poorness, no loan, right? Like none of that extra help that allows you to change your situation was afforded, and often it was actively worked against.
Yes.
Anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent, but I had interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, so just like being in that uncomfortable state, And I think about it a lot. Like, of course, I'm a huge football fan, and so I talk. Like, I hear football coaches all the
What?
time. I hear football coaches talking all the time. Like, if you're gonna grow, then like we have to push you to be uncomfortable. Like, you're not gonna grow like unless you become uncomfortable.
Yeah,
And,
learning and like true growth is not a pleasant process always.
yeah, and so I wonder like how many people are like putting themselves in like uncomfortable positions and listening to people. Like, yes, like, are you listening to people say things that may make you uncomfortable, right? And can you do that? I think for me, it's become kind of a sign of like my friendships with people, and like, can I tell you stuff and like say things that might make you uncomfortable, but like it's gonna be for your benefit and help you grow, and like you can kind of get like a glimpse into like who I am as like the life that I've lived and kind of like what I've had to go through and like kind of like the viewpoints that I've had. Can you like am I comfortable enough with you to like make you uncomfortable? If phrasing makes any sense.
Yes, it does. Like, do you have the intimacy, the emotional intimacy enough that you feel it's a safe space to say something that is hard to hear and you don't know exactly how the person's going to respond, right?
Yeah.
But it's definitely not going to be like you know that you're saying something that is not eliciting a positive
Yes.
response, right? And so I think what you're talking about really is like, is that safe space?
Yes.
Do you feel comfortable? But I kind of like that phrasing. Do I feel comfortable making you uncomfortable? Right? Because I think it's a very different choice if you're white than if you're black, right?
Yes.
And so I think there's plenty of time. Like, I definitely feel as a white person, I don't have to worry about that, right? I don't have to walk in to a room full of people and be worried. Like, of course, socially, I don't, like, at my new job, I don't want to say something wrong or, like, irritate people. But I don't have to be extra careful that I will be judged worse for making them feel, like, uncomfortable, right? Whereas I mean, I don't know, but I imagine that a lot of black people feel like I have to speak a certain way, I have to look a certain way, just so I'm not discounted. I have to be very careful about what I say.
Yeah, and it goes into like a lot of bit of like respectability politics, where like.
Can you define that term?
Basically, like, I have to be respectable in all
instances.
And that is the only way for you to see me as like a
legitimate.
Human being and legitimate,
worthy of respect.
Yeah, like in order for you to like see me or view me as somebody that can contribute, I always have to be
best behavior.
Yeah, I have to come to work in a suit and tie. Like, I have to like. Everyone else can come in as business casual, but I have to be dressed to the nines every day. Like, someone else can send an angry email being upset, but like I have to be like gracious and be like, hey, like, this is something that like maybe you should look at in the future, try not to do. Whereas like another coworker can be like, you freaking idiot, like, what are you doing? This is absolutely wrong. Like, you can't do this. You make this mistake again, you're getting out of here. You're being fired. Where like the respectability politics, and there's definitely some more that goes into it, but it basically says like you have to like hold yourself with some like you have to hold yourself basically to like a higher standard than like the rest
everyone
of
else has to. Right.
And so like I just, for me, like, I kind of lost my train of thought there.
Okay. It's like we said, it's like a heavy topic, but
but yeah, just being like, can I make you like uncomfortable, and do I feel comfortable enough with you to make you uncomfortable? I feel like a lot of people have been. This is like a situation where I feel like a number of like white Americans have joined in this fight. And for me, that is definitely like a yes, a positive and a win. It feels good to have like people out marching in the streets, which I have not done because of the coronavirus.
Yes.
And like,
that's funny that you bring that up, because I was wondering, so when we moved here, like 1 or 2 weeks in, there was a whole bunch of protests.
Yes.
And I was like, I feel like I'm neglecting my moral obligation to do this, but I also felt that it was very unsafe. And everywhere is different, so I don't want to say any protest is unsafe.
Yeah.
But we're here in Phoenix, Arizona, where there has barely been any coronavirus shutdown. We now have had a faster rate of increase the past week than New York ever had. And like, nobody is out wearing masks. What week are we in the pandemic? And like, nobody is doing any type of social distancing. There's no, like, it's business as usual, like all as close to possible as business as usual, without it actually being business as usual. So, and of course 2 weeks ago, the numbers weren't that bad, but we had just come from a place that was very conservatively dealing with coronavirus. So to come to somewhere where...
Well, when you say conservatively, like, I feel like we were very... Durham, North Carolina was very aggressive.
Yes. So I mean, we were being like, we were taking the safe side. Like we're gonna do more things to be ultra safe. So yes, a very aggressive response.
We're gonna take more precautions.
So to go from that to a place where it seems like nobody kind of cared, I was definitely like, shit's gonna hit the fan, excuse my language, in like 2 to 3 weeks. And what do you know? Here we are 2 to 3 weeks later, and things are just skyrocketing. The mayor or the governor has actually said, like, the safest place to be is at home. I recommend you should try to stay at home. But like, there's been no mandated anything.
Well, there was like the mandated curfew.
Well, yeah, but that was for protests, not for coronavirus.
But it was still mandated.
It was still mandated. But again, it was mandated because they were trying... I think the protests were very much... Anyway,
Yeah.
But so I definitely was wrestling with that in my mind of, I feel like I should be going to the protests based on what my heart feels is the right thing to do. And I had read somewhere online that was like, what are you going to tell your kids 20 years from now that you sat at home? Like during this pivotal... You know what I mean? And I was like, I don't want that to be me. Like, my kids are like, oh, Civil Rights Movement 2.0. Like, what did you do, Mom and Dad? It's like, well... Nothing. Like, I know, but at the same time, I truly didn't feel like it was safe for us.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
Well, I definitely didn't feel like... I respected the people that chose to go.
Yes, I absolutely do too.
I was very...
I don't want to shame anybody. Like,
yeah, and like, I was very thankful for them going. And like, and as I said earlier, that was a reason for me and like to have hope, especially to see like white people out protesting. Because of like the coronavirus, I didn't feel the need to like protest, but I also understand that like this is a marathon we're running here, and like this marathon is going to call for other like actionable items.
You're ready for leg 3.
Yeah.
We're still on the warm-up lap. Like, is that what you're telling me?
No,
like
I still understand the warm-up lap, but like due to like health concerns, but also like understanding that it's a marathon, like there for me, like there are going to be other actionable items that are going to come that like are going to need this momentum to continue pushing forward.
And if we all burn out at the beginning,
right,
like some of us have to save our energy for later. Yes.
Well, I don't feel like hopefully I don't feel like I'm saving my energy.
Well, it's not that you're like head in the sand or ignoring anything. I mean, we're staying safe, but maybe my phrasing is not good.
Yeah.
But I think I understand what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
And I agree that it's a marathon. And I also think that protesting is not the only way to show support, right? I think, of course, a public display lets people, like you just said, it was heartwarming to you to see so many people standing up for the same thing that you are standing up for.
Yes.
Right? So, of course, if nobody protested, a lot of the people calling for action would feel like they were falling on deaf ears. So, I think that protesting, in a way, can be necessary. But just because you didn't protest doesn't mean you don't support the movement, right? Like, if a person stayed home and didn't protest, but read books or looked up on articles or listened to podcasts or did something, even just thinking, this is something I probably need to spend time learning about.
Yeah.
Like, that's already
I feel
a
like
win.
you're just a part of
and that's
you're just as part of the movement as like somebody that went out and protested.
Yes. And like at the end of the day, that's the action that we want, is more people educating themselves, taking a look of introspection and being like, is this important to me? Where do I fall on this matter? Like whether you go out or not.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah. So it's like, for me, it's also been like interesting to see kind of the college sports landscape, and seeing a bunch of student athletes across the country kind of speaking up and following the like leadership of kind of the movement and being like, Black Lives Matter, and they're not all of these just like macro like police brutality or like systematic like racism, like housing discrimination or like loans and stuff. Like, they're not all these like macro like issues. Some of them can be like the way like the coach talks to them, or like the way like on a campus like they feel like they're being attacked, or they don't feel like the campus is like for them, or like the rest of the student body, not the rest of the student body, but there may be students or sections of students on campus that like they only see them as like a Black student athlete, and the only reason you're here is because you can dribble a ball or you can play your sport. Like, those, like, if Black lives are to matter, like those people on those campuses, like the Black professors, like they need to feel empowered to be who they are. They need to feel like, along with those Black students, that like they are contributing something to this like campus culture and campus environment that is valued.
Yes, and same with like Black students that are not student athletes, right? Like every person in the community, right? And I think that it's very important for the institution, whether it's a school or what have you, to demonstrate that.
Yeah, because I think for a lot of people, like it had like, it's not just simply like not doing anything. It has to be like assertive action to like show like, hey, we value these things, right? Because in a lot of ways you can't just be neutral.
No.
You can't just be like, oh well, we're glad you're here. We like, in my opinion, we need to take actionable like
steps,
measures to show, hey, like we value having you here. Like, you're an important member of like our community.
And I think so. I don't have a great way to explain this, but I think that this point might be kind of hard to understand. But one thing, one of my really good friends in a past relationship always felt, the boyfriend wasn't inviting her to do stuff, or like didn't actively ask her to be involved and engaged. And he'd be like, here's my plans. And she'd be like, well, can I come? And he'd be like, sure, that's fine if you're there. But so yes, he's allowing her to be included, but that's very different than, hey babe, I want to do this with you.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think that's what you're trying to demonstrate is it's not enough to, sure, I'll allow you to come along. I'll allow you to be here. It needs to be an active, engaged invitation. Like, we want you here. We want to do this with you because we value you and we value the perspective that you bring. And, you know, not just the perspective, everything that you bring, right?
And I think that's important not only for like students, but also for like faculty and like
the whole community.
The whole community.
So I just wanted to throw in that analogy because I think it's pretty easy in a romantic relationship sense to understand the difference of you're allowed to be here versus you're actively wanted here. But what are some steps that an institution like a school could take? Like, what does that look like in your opinion? How can a school show?
So I don't know, to be honest with you. I'm still kind of thinking about like kind of the ways like universities can do that, because there are some things that they can do. I would say like doing a better job of like recruiting like minorities, actively going out and like at a lot of universities, like the majority of the black students are like recruited for like sports, and so like the student body kind of begins to think, oh, like if you are here and you are a minority, an African American male, then you are here because like you most likely play a sport. And so like just the thought of having that, like, so like a fellow classmate having that assumption about you, like that can have a dramatic effect on your experience. Like everybody only sees minority, especially for like non-student athletes. Like I can imagine walking into a classroom at Duke and being like a 6'3" African American male, and then like a classmate then come up to you, so what sport do you play?
Right, or even worse, just assuming you're dumb.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, I don't want to have that person in my group because
they're a student athlete.
Yes.
Right.
And so
I'm not trying to say that student athletes are dumb, but I do think it's a semi-widely held incorrect perspective that student athletes only got in because of their athleticism and that they don't pull their weight. And I'm sure like everything is a spectrum, right? I'm sure there are some student athletes that maybe would struggle if they weren't an athlete, right? Like
I feel like they would, like if they weren't an athlete, in my honest opinion, like there would probably be a lot more like student athletes. If they weren't athletes, they would have infinitely more time and they would probably do a lot better at their athletics.
I guess so. I totally agree. I think, again, I might be choosing poor words, but what I'm trying to communicate is I'm sure that there are some student athletes that struggle, and part of them getting into Duke, the athletics was a major portion. But that's not everybody, right? And there's plenty of non-student athletes that struggle, right? And maybe they got in because their parents' name is on the library, right? Or maybe they got in because, you know, they had a YouTube channel from the age of 2 and they have 300,000 followers, right? Like, what I'm trying to say is there are plenty of people who get into institutions that maybe didn't earn it in the sense that people often think is earning.
Yeah, but
doesn't mean they don't deserve to be there. Doesn't mean, you know, they may or may not struggle. Like, but my point is, I think a lot of people look at student athletes and are like, oh, you didn't earn it in the academic sense. And my point is, there's a lot of non-student athletes that also didn't earn it in the academic sense. I think your point is that many of the student athletes do earn it in the academic sense.
Yes.
Which is also a true point. It's just slightly different than the point I was trying to make. Glad we got to the bottom of that one, but yeah, like especially if you like.
Yeah. So
to have all these assumptions about you that you can't pull your weight in the classroom or like.
Yeah, that like you have no control over. Like
right.
There's no like based on like previous classes that I've taken or like how I've done my work. Like you've never worked with me. Like it's just like biases that people have because of your association with a group on campus.
Right. And I think it can also be damaging too, because of the message that it sends. Like let's take out the whole like, oh, maybe you can't earn your weight in an academic sense. Let's imagine like your example, there's like big tall black student and everybody like assumes that they're a student athlete. Maybe they assume they're like the smartest kid in the class, like it doesn't matter, but to have someone be like, oh, do you play basketball, or like, oh, are you on the team, that kind of sends a message of like, the number one thing we value from you is your athletic ability.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You wouldn't ask that to any other Joe Schmo in the class. So why would you ask it to this person? Right? Like, and maybe you are, it's just an innocent question in your mind, but it perpetuates this concept that the value that individual brings is not the same as the value that this other individual brings to this classroom environment. And I think that's the problem. And I think that's also, why it's really hard for a lot of white people to understand, because I do think it's one of those implicit biases. You can ask that question and have no malintent whatsoever. Doesn't excuse the behavior. I'm not trying to be a sympathizer here, but I can understand how people have nothing but good intentions, and so when they're you're laughing.
Well, I'm just thinking like the road to, like, there's a phrase, the road to hell is like
paved with good intentions.
Yeah,
totally appropriate in this situation. Couldn't have said it better, right? And I think, yeah, so this is kind of segueing to a different topic, but you're talking about how it feels at the beginning of the episode.
Mm.
And I think another thing that feels heavy to me is acknowledging, like, as I'm on this learning process, is also realizing that there are people who are choosing not to learn or are presented with the same information and are not getting to the same place that I'm getting to. Like, that is really frustrating. And it's like, I'm sure black people have been dealing with this for freaking ever. Like, imagine how frustrated they are, but like...
Well, it's been normalized.
Yes. And so I think some of the biggest misconception, or the biggest, at least in my personal experience, the biggest pushbacks to the kind of the human rights movement we're going through is one I already talked about, the like, oh, I don't have white privilege. My parents grew up dirt poor, right? Or I grew up dirt poor. Like, there's a lot of financial implications, but it's also so separate in some ways, right? Like, no one's terrorizing you and burning your house down like Malcolm X, right? And like all this stuff. Anyway, but I think another misconception is these microaggressions. I think a lot of people think to themselves, well, I had no malintent in my heart to ask this question, right? I was purely getting to know the guy, just striking up a conversation. Yeah, and I know that I love sports. Maybe they do too. Or like, I know our culture loves sports. Like, that's a very easy topic to strike up a conversation with, right? So I can see how people might, when presented with this, kind of reject it and stay in denial because and because they just don't understand. And like, I've heard gymnasts, there have been a lot of gymnasts, NCAA gymnasts, that have come forward and been like, I experienced racism on my team and at my campus, and it like wasn't great. And one team member in particular, in response to hearing her teammate say, like, here's the like, one situation in particular was this, and she explained it. And another teammate was like, well, I firmly believe that saying something that can be kind of racist is very different than having hate in your heart and being actually racist. And I think that's something a lot of white people think. And I'm here to say that that's not the case, right? Like, no, maybe you don't have a lot of hate in your heart, but by allowing these microaggressions and allowing, like, slightly racist comments, you're like, oh, well, they didn't mean it. Like, that just continues this culture.
Yeah, you're giving them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, and it continues this idea that these types of comments are okay. So maybe, no, you don't have hate in your heart, like you want to go lynch a bunch of people, but it's all a slippery slope, right? If you're not actively against it, you're for it. And this is one of those scenarios where I feel like people are like, oh, I'm like, it's not that bad, or like, they didn't have hate in their heart, like they, you know, didn't mean any harm, but like, it's like, you have to take a stand.
Yeah, and it's funny you kind of like brought up this, like, oh, like, they didn't have this, like, hate in their heart, like, they didn't want to go out and, like, do these racist things, but, like, I feel like this is something I listen to a lot of Bomani Jones, and he talks a lot, like, this past week or so, he's been talking a lot about, like, giving people, like, the benefit of the doubt, and I think racism and, like, since America has been started, like, white people have been getting the benefit of the doubt. Like, hey, like, they don't really have hate in their heart. Like, we're, like, doing this, like, they're doing this racist thing, but, like, they're really good people. Like,
yes.
They say, like, they say some racist things, but, like,
they didn't mean it.
Yeah,
they're
they
really
didn't
good
mean
people.
it.
They don't hate black people.
Like, they publish something on Facebook that is like, and then delete it and then give an apology. Oh, like, you know, like, we're gonna give them the benefit of the doubt that they didn't, like, this is a really stressful time, like, that's not how they really feel. But, like, throughout American history, we have seen, like, people that make these comments that are racist comments, this is how they actually feel.
Yes.
And, like, we should believe them when
someone
they say
shows you how they are over and over, believe them. Yeah.
Like, if someone shows you who they are and how they feel, like, we should believe them. And
like that, I forget what her name was, but the woman who she was asked to put her dog on a leash.
In New York.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like that's right. If you can so blasé say things like, and this is an example again from gymnastics. A group of black athletes on a gymnastics team, their coach came up to them because they were all sitting together. They were doing vault, and was like, "Oh, haha, are we at the back of the bus over here?" You know, like, if you can say that so flippantly, what more extreme things can you do? Do you know what I mean? When it just comes, like, off the back of your hand, you didn't even think about it, right? Like, what are the choices you make? You know, if it's so, I don't think I'm not articulating this well, but I think you understand what I'm trying to say.
And I think, like, I want to point out, like, the benefit of the doubt is to, like, the larger, like, community and bigger structures. Like, if I know you personally, like, you're my friend, I know who you are, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. But if I don't know you and, like, we have no interactions, I'm not giving you the benefit of the doubt. So, like, I don't want to say this in, like, some huge, like, vacuum that, like,
sure, that's
it's
but I think it also kind of goes back to the respectability politics you were talking about, right? You're in a situation at work and one coworker, like, flies off the handle. They're given the benefit of the doubt. It was a bad day, stressful time, right? The black coworker does this. Oh, they're an angry black woman. They can't keep their emotions in control. Like, we need to get rid of her. You know, like,
yeah.
She's not given the benefit of the doubt. She has bad days too. right? Like
we need to do
all
something
have-
about this. Like we need to write them up. Like maybe suspend them for a couple of days.
Right, like that was so unacceptable, and
Yeah.
that may be true. Maybe it is company policy, and maybe she broke it. Totally fine, but the issue becomes differential treatment, right?
Yes.
If she broke company policy and gets some type of reprimand, great. But then the white person that does the same thing needs to receive the same reprimand. And if the if the white person gets benefit of the doubt and nothing happens, she should get benefit of the doubt. And like, yeah.
It should just be extended equally.
Right. And so I think kind of the response of not getting the benefit of the doubt leads to this respectability politics. I need to hold myself to this higher standard because I'm not receiving the benefit of the doubt. So at all times, I have to make sure I am not saying anything inflammatory.
Yeah.
Like, I have to make sure that there's nothing that could be misconstrued,
Yes.
And that's, like, I think we've talked a little bit about the emotional labor and mental burden on a different podcast talking about, like, gender roles. But what an emotional burden that has to be to constantly be like, I'm not,
Yeah, I'm not gonna upset anyone.
I'm not gonna upset anyone. Like, I need to think, I can't even imagine how much of a mental burden that has to be exhausting, right? Yeah.
It definitely is exhausting. But I would say that, like, going forward, I think that people, like, you can educate yourself on these issues. Like, there are books upon books upon books that not only talk about these issues, talk about, like, the way, like, African Americans, like, feel, like, how, like,
I have a quick question when you're done with this.
Just how they feel, how throughout history, like, America has treated African Americans, from, like, just Joe Smo to, like, being, like, American soldiers that came back from the war for fighting for this country, and, like, not being allowed to, like, sit in a restaurant, or, like, not being able to sit on the bus. They had to go to the back of the bus. Like, I fought for this country so that, like, it could be free. Like,
and many people died.
Yeah.
Right? They gave their lives.
Yeah, and those same people, those same African Americans, they come back to America, and, like, it's like you're still a
subclass citizen.
Yeah, you're a subclass citizen, and, like, that subclass citizenship, like, in ways is still being perpetrated today in society. Mm-hmm. And, like, that is, in my opinion, the whole reason for the Black Lives, like, Matter movement. And kind of finishing, like, my thoughts on this whole thing, like, Coach K had, like, a great video that was posted on the Duke men's basketball account, and he just says, like, Black Lives Matter. Like, you should say it. Can you say it? Can you say that, like, Black Lives Matter? And if you and somebody that's like, well, all lives matter, I'll be like, well, did all lives matter during slavery? Because I would definitely say that, like, America definitely told Black people, like, your lives are less. Like, your lives do not matter as much as mine. And if that was the view that was held during slavery, that Black lives don't matter. Like, we have this whole history of going through Jim Crow, going through the civil rights. Like, yes, like, American government and American history said that, like, Black lives matter a little bit more. But I never, like, it is my opinion that, like, the government, like, it never said, like, Black lives matter, like, equally. And I think that is what this whole movement is about, is, like, Black lives saying that we matter and like we want to be treated equally.
Mm-hmm.
And there's data upon data upon data that says we are not treated equally. If you listen to Black people talk about like their experience in like American culture, they're not treated equally.
And I think that's a key point is if you do nothing else, just listen. People are so quick to get defensive or dismissive. And it's like, just listen. I had two last points. One question and then one quick point. So the question I had, and this is just your personal opinion, do you think either the term Black or African American is like more correct or more PC, or because I've seen different opinions on social media, and I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Like to me, I think it's 6 half dozen. I think African American feels more like respectable and like kind of the correct term. I think a lot of people like use African American because they feel uncomfortable saying Black. But I think like use the term that like you're most comfortable using. And like I'm not so much in like whether you use African American or Black, but like what are you talking about? What are you discussing? Like what are the conversations you're having? Because I doubt very many people are sitting around their house being like, oh, like the African American community is such and such. Like I don't think that's like how you regularly talk. So I think for most academics, they're probably going to use like African American, but like just for having conversations and stuff, I feel like Black is appropriate.
Interesting. That's interesting to hear your perspective, because I definitely held the belief that like African American was more PC, like that somehow just saying Black was not great. But I had done some reading, and it was kind of saying the message I thought it was trying to say was, well, not all Black people like feel a connection to Africa or even came from Africa. Like I'm of course descendants of slaves.
Yeah.
Right? But that doesn't make up every single Black person. And furthermore, there are a lot of people that feel like Black is just more inclusive, because you can have 10 different people that all look wildly different, but they're all classified as Black.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was just curious.
Yeah.
So anyway, the last point, just going back to, you were proud that student athletes are using their platform to affect change. Did you hear about the player, I think in Mississippi?
Yeah,
is like
he's at
refusing to
Mississippi
play unless
well,
they take
and
the
that,
Confederate
like,
flag down.
yeah, and the state Senate.
Can you tell us the situation?
Oh well, the state Senate has now like.
I heard about this on the gymnastics podcast, so
yeah.
I want to hear it from a football fan.
I'm not 100% sure of the like specifics, but basically the Mississippi state flag has like parts, or like some of it is like basically the Confederate flag.
Definitely gonna be looking this up as soon as this is over.
Yeah, so they have. What it looks like. Yeah, so they have like basically like the Mississippi state flag gives like reverence and pays homage to like the Confederate flag, and so because the Confederate flag was basically like, because the Confederates basically wanted to like leave America, like
continue slavery.
Continue slavery. They wanted to have nothing to do with Americans. They want to have nothing to do with America. Basically, like the kid who's a student athlete, he's like, why are we paying homage to like these people that were part of the Confederate? They didn't want to be Americans. They didn't want to be a part of America. So why are we paying homage to you? And he basically said, I will not be competing for the Mississippi State football team until like the flag is removed. And so then Ole Miss.
So was this like the university flag, or it's like the Mississippi State
flag?
flag?
No, it's the Mississippi State flag.
Oh wow!
And so the head coaches at Mississippi State and Ole Miss football, and then a whole bunch of other like community, like university officials. They all basically went down to the state capitol and lobbied to the Senate to like remove the flag. And so today, or it may have been, is either today or yesterday, there was actually a vote that went through, and they voted to take out the state flag, and they will be getting a new state flag.
So they're gonna redesign it?
Yeah.
Wow.
So that,
holy
like,
smokes!
yeah.
Good job.
So this is
Student
that's
athlete?
one kid.
I wish we remembered his name.
I think it's some Hill, I think. But yeah,
Good job, Mr. Hill.
But yeah, and honestly, that is just like one example of like a number of ways student athletes are stepping up. It's funny, even at my like. So I went to James F. Burns High School in South Carolina, and like James F. Burns was a documented like segregationist. He didn't believe that blacks and whites should be together at the school. He's basically a documented like racist, and so there is a group of alumni who I wholeheartedly support. They are coming forth to try and get the school board to actually rename the school. And it's
Nice.
funny to hear like the feedback, because it used to be like a few years back they actually got the mascot changed, which
What
was
was the
Rebels.
mascot?
So you can understand how that can be a little bit problematic. But they got the mascot changed, and now they're trying to get the name of the school changed. And it's funny to hear people like see the comments of people that like just aren't listening. Like, our school is named after a man that distinctly and vehemently said, I do not want black people here. Like, black people should not be in the same school as white people. And so, like, I don't understand how they could, like, understand that these were his views and then be like, oh, well, like, you guys should be, like, happy that, like, you graduated from here. Like, none of you, when you were in school here, like, had a problem. Like, you guys didn't have any problems when you were running up and down the football field and winning games. Which,
again,
like,
your value here is
yeah,
for our football team and not for anything
like,
else, right?
You didn't have any problem like graduation when they were like, and it's like that's not the point. Like, I enjoyed
maybe I did have a problem and didn't
or maybe
empowered to say anything.
But our parents, their parents, like, they had been fighting this battle for years.
Lives,
like,
yeah.
And it is just now our turn to kind of take up this mantle, and like.
But I mean, put it any other way, right? If this person was a pedophile, a known pedophile, no one would be like, let's name a school after him. Or if it was, like, we think
after
it's this
we
great
learn,
person,
after we learn
they're a
that,
pedophile,
we're
like,
changing
out
the
there
name,
you go,
yeah.
right? And like, I just don't understand why this is so hard to understand. But I do think a lot of white people just don't get it, because they're not the class that, their skin color, they're not the group that is othered and that is hated, and that and maybe the group isn't hated now, but like they've never felt that feeling of like we were unwanted here.
Yeah.
And now
so
you have this like statue or this name of the school of this person that didn't want us here. Like that doesn't feel good. Like I don't understand. I totally get it. Like why is that so hard to understand?
Well, they just come up with the like, and some of well, it's funny to actually like think about like. Basically, we're saying this person was a segregationist. He didn't want black people here. Why would we name the school after him? And so they're like, well, we named the school after him, and then like we knew this on the front end, but now, do we really want to go back and kind of like rewrite history because of something that he did way back then?
Again, benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, and also like. I think a little bit is projecting onto them. Like, if you find out that I did something in my past, are you gonna try and like
cancel me?
Yeah, cancel me. And like I say to that like, depends on what you did.
Yeah.
Like we all and like it also I think like for me it depends on like how contrite you are and like have you like sought to be like. Have you sought to improve yourself?
Mm-hmm. That's interesting you took it that way because I very much like the pushback against changing the name of the high school. Never once it crossed my mind was it like maybe they're concerned that like they'll get canceled, right?
Yeah.
And it was just much more of this doesn't seem like that big a deal to us. We're fine with the status quo. It's a big effort to change the status quo. Right? And because we're not the affected group, it doesn't seem worth the effort, right? And that's where the deflections come from. Well, this didn't bother you before. How come it bothers you now? Let's go back to when it didn't bother you before, right? Like it's less effort, right? Instead of saying, okay, yeah, I totally get it. We should change the name. That's going to be a big hassle. Worth it, right? Their first response is instead to try to tamp down the complaints and just keep the status quo. And this is one of those instances where I'm saying if you're not actively for it, you're against it. And it may not seem like you have hate in your heart or whatever, but it's like it's these tiny little microaggressions that add up constantly that continues to perpetuate the notion that black people don't matter. And so I think it's really important, like the first thing you gotta do is like listen.
Yeah.
I mean, same with Larry Nassar. I know we're getting on a whole nother subject, but it's like people came and said, this person is sexually abusing people like me many times, but they just weren't believed, right? And so I think, again, it's one of those like, oh, you didn't know what, he's a doctor, you didn't understand the treatment. How could you know? You're only 8, right? Like, just dismissal after dismissal. And so I think we see the same thing in this scenario.
Yeah.
So I think that goes back to my number one thing of like, if you do nothing else, just listen. Anyway, I feel like we're talking this to death, but
no,
I think it's important. Yeah.
So, Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter. Can you say it?
Yeah, can you say it? All right, that is what we're doing. Bye-bye.
I thought you were going to do the deuces.